Hello and welcome back to the Ascent Cycling Podcast. Today we continue our team preview discussions and podcasts ahead of the 2021 season of cycling, and today we will be focusing on UAE Team Emirates. And coming off, I think, a highly successful season, it would be fair to say 33 wins in total, and we all know that was highlighted by Tadej Pogacar's Tour de France win in the GC, winning 3 stages at the race as well and stealing the yellow jersey from Primož Roglič to end off the race on La Planche de Belfi. Guillaume, what do you make of UAE's 2020?
In one word, I would go with stellar. I did not think UAE would wrap up the 2020 season with a Grand Tour win. Sure, we all had seen Tadej Pogacar in 2019, and I think it probably was on Twitter that I said that, or maybe in one of my videos, but I thought he would hit a Tour de France wall, which is, quite self-explanatory. You perform well on the Vuelta or the Giro, then you try to go for the Tour de France as a leader, and you just realize that you might not be there. Well, safe to say I was wrong. Tadej Pogacar not only won 2 stages, he's won the Tour de France. So, there's not much I could have said, and I don't think many people predicted that win. But overall, a very decent season. We've talked about Pogacar. I think Ulissi has had a decent year. Jasper Philipsen having his maiden win, I think, on a Grand Tour. Was it? I think it was on the Vuelta. Yeah, it was on the Vuelta. He got his maiden win. Formolo as well, doing well on the Dauphiné, but maybe not as well as some would have hoped.
So I think we can take a look at UAE's transfers ahead of the 2021 season, and they haven't made loads of moves, but they have made some great moves, and one in particular, it was the story of a few weeks ago. We did an emergency podcast on the topic. At the time, we didn't know who Marc Hirschi had transferred to, but UAE Team Emirates are the lucky team to snatch Marc Hirschi away from Team DSM. What an unreal signing this is, out of nowhere, to get Marc Hirschi added to your ranks when you had your 2021 team really set. Is just unreal for the UAE outfits. Adding to that though, they have also signed Matteo Trentin, who just a really strong rider, as we know, great sprinter, great on the cobbles too, and Rafal Majka, who is a rider who can go for GC in his own right. I don't see him winning a Grand Tour in his career, but if nothing else, he is going to be a super domestique for Tadej Pogacar in the Tour de France this season, something UAE didn't really deliver on in supporting Tadej Pogacar last season. He was often isolated up against Jumbo-Visma. In the end, didn't matter, but Rafal Majka can provide some massive support for Tadej Pogacar. They've also signed Ryan Gibbons and Juan Ayuso, who is a neo-pro, I think 18 years old, coming from Team Colpack. Looking at their outgoings as well, they lose 5 riders, really for me highlighted by Jasper Philipsen, who is heading to Alpecin Phoenix. He won a stage at the Vuelta, like you mentioned, Guillaume. Big loss for them. Talented young sprinter. They also lose Fabio Aru, Sergio Henao, Tom Bolli and Edward Ravazzi.
I think except from Philipsen, they've just managed to strengthen their team massively, and you've mentioned the addition of Marc Hirschi, which was somewhat unexpected. It's probably one of the best pieces of business we've had during this transfer window. There's still a lot of questions around the transfer, and Marc Hirschi has actually signed an NDA, therefore cannot say anything. So the transfer is still a bit of a mystery in my opinion. But UAE strengthening their team after a very, very good 2020 season, and providing Tadej Pogacar with some very much needed help when it will come to the mountain. Because, as you said, he was somewhat isolated when it came to the Tour de France, basically socially distancing from his teammates as soon as the road would go up. So to have someone like Rafal Majka joining the ranks of the team is a very, very decent add. Matteo Trentin as well, very strong rider when it comes to the Classic, which will go and help someone like Alessandro Kristoff, who year in, year out performs on the one-day races. Ryan Gibbons as well, the South African, leaving NTT then, which is now Kubica Assos, the former winner of the Longawi, I think, and also top 5 finisher of the K11's Great Ocean Road Race. And you mentioned Juan Ayuso from Colpack Balan, a very, very young rider who won a fair few races in the under 23 and under 18 ranks. So I'm quite eager to see what he's going to do in 2021 with UAE. UAE, a team known from having a very young rider joining them, the likes of Camilo Andres Ardila a couple of years ago, or even Alessandro Covi.
So I think bringing it back to Marc Hirschi, it was rumours that he was on a minimum contract of around £30,000 or dollars, euros, whatever you want to say, 30,000 euros per year at Team DSM, even after his fantastic 2020. These are rumours. I'm not certain that this is the case, but I think he's now on a contract of approximately 1 million euros per year. So you can see, if nothing else, that could be behind the transfer of Marc Hirschi. I'm not certain. These are rumours. Can't say for sure, but it's a big transfer for Marc Hirschi. And I think we may as well by starting with focusing on Marc Hirschi in this podcast. And he was the breakout rider for me of 2020. Broke onto the scene at the Tour de France. Looked really strong straight away, even on stage 2, almost winning stage 2 ahead of Julian Alaphilippe to Nice. He, for me, has shown that he is the second strongest puncher in the world. Second at Liège, first at La Flèche, top 3 at the World Championships. This man, remember, is still 22 years old. What do you expect from Marc Hirschi in 2021?
I think he's going to win one of the Ardennes Classic. I do feel like, you've said he finished second of Liège. Let's be realistic. He probably should have won it if it wasn't for a certain Frenchman, which I will not name. I think he could have won both La Flèche and Liège last season. And I think to this day, Marc Hirschi might be the most suited rider to go and win the 3 Ardennes Classic in 1 year. Philippe Gilbert had done it back in 2011, when out 10 years after that performance. And I feel like the 22-year-old Swissman is the most capable rider out of everyone here to win it all. He's incredible when it comes to short hills. He's got a very decent sprint behind him. He got beaten in a sprint on the Tour de France by Bernal and Primož Roglič and Tadej Pogacar. However, he had a massive solo breakaway in the legs, so one could explain that. But interesting signing, unexpected signing, but what a rider that is, and what an addition it is to the roster of UAE.
UAE have been very kind to us podcasters ahead of the season, really releasing the full schedule for their riders, their leading riders at least. And what intrigues me about Marc Hirschi's schedule is he's riding quite a few cobbled classics, including the Ronde van Vlaanderen, Omloop, for example, as well, E3. I think he could be a challenger in those cobbled races, something we haven't really seen from him so far in his career. Milano-San Remo, I think, why not? Marc Hirschi could win Milano-San Remo for sure, as Alaphilippe did a few years ago, if they get into a select group in the final. I think we're seeing that more and more as well at Milano-San Remo, seeing sprinters dropped in favour of the punchers who just constantly attack, making it impossible for the pure sprinters to stay to the line. And yeah, Hirschi for me has to be a favourite for that race. Strada Bianca, another race Marc Hirschi could win. It seems he is set to go back to the Tour de France this season, where I guess he will be riding for Pogacar, something he didn't have to do at all at Sunweb last season. They had no GC man, so I'm intrigued to see how strong Hirschi genuinely is on the mountains when he is trying his best to support a genuine GC contender at a 3-week race, because we could even see Hirschi trying to develop himself into a 3-week Grand Tour contender as well in the big mountains at some point in his career.
I do like the fact you've mentioned his calendar and mainly his early focus on the cobbles. It is really reminiscent with what we've said in the Ascent podcast with Jakob Fuglsang, in the sense that he might try to focus on a race like the Ronde. It could be interesting to see how Hirschi would perform on the Ronde, because Alaphilippe did very well, and I think Alaphilippe and Hirschi are very similar riders. So I'm quite curious to see how the Swissman will fare on the on the good old Ronde van Vlaanderen, but then he will have the Ardennes. And I think the Tour de France is going to be a test for him, because he's had his breakthrough season as a free rider. He was able to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, without having to care for anyone else in the team. Now he will go there, and the question is, what role will he fill in? Is he going to be purely a teammate for Pogacar, or is he still going to have his opportunities here and there? Because I feel like having someone like Marc Hirschi in your team and reducing him, to a role of teammate might not be the wisest decision.
I think we may see something similar to Wout van Aert at the 2020 Tour de France, where he is given his opportunities, but is perhaps more than he would like forced to ride for his leader. So we'll see how Hirschi fares in that role. And one other race I have noticed on his calendar is Paris-Roubaix, the pure cobbled race of the year. I mean, we'll see how he does there. I certainly am not expecting him to win it, but we haven't seen what he can do, so who knows if Hirschi will be competitive at Paris-Roubaix this year.
We talked about Hirschi and how he would have to act as a teammate during the Tour de France for a certain Slovenian. That Slovenian is none other than Tadej Pogacar, the 22-year-old. It feels like 22 is a very decent number for UAE, having Marc Hirschi, having Tadej Pogacar, and having another rider we will talk later on about. But Tadej Pogacar, who made his debut on the Grand Tours back in 2019 with a very surprising third place on the Vuelta. I don't think many people expected it, and he's actually performed very well that year, being potentially one of the best climbers during this Vuelta. Certainly stronger, in my opinion, than an Alejandro Valverde, who had finished in second. And he's gone to the Tour de France in a leadership position, but as I said in the intro, I did not think he was going to win it. But oh boy, did he deliver. Winning the Tour de France, the mountain jersey, winning a couple of stages as well. I mean, what a performance. He was just absolutely incredible. He destroyed the time trial at La Planche des Belles Filles. He won at the Grand Colombier. He won in La Reims. He even started off quite well with an 8th place in Nice, where Marc Hirschi was fighting with Julien Lafilippe for the win. I think he got 2nd as well in Orsières-Merlette, just behind the man who would then finish 2nd of the Tour, Primož Roglič. And prior to that, he did well on the Dauphiné, finishing in 4th place of the French 1 week race behind Dan Martinez, I think, who had won it. And mainly, I think one of the performances for him was to defeat Primož Roglič a first time on the time trial in the National Championships of Slovenia, which might have given him an edge during the Tour de France and the now infamous time trial.
I think it would be fair to say Tadej Pogacar is a generational talent in the Grand Tours. We've seen 2 Grand Tours from this man in his career. 3rd and 1st were his finishes, and he has racked up 6 stage wins at Grand Tours already, which is just unreal to me, for sure. And something else that impresses me is that he is a class sprinter. He's probably one of, maybe alongside Roglič or even above Roglič, one of the best sprinters of the Grand Tour contenders. And when you're the fastest in the Pure Mountains, the fastest in the 3rd week time trials, and you're one of the quickest sprinters, you're going to be doing pretty well. I think that's fair to say. And in addition to his stage race form, he was on the podium at Liège. Who knows what that would have been without the infamous Alaphilippe moment there. He was also top 15 in the front group at Milano-San Remo, just behind Alaphilippe and Van Aert at that race. So he can ride the one-day classics as well. He has impressed me just to an incredible degree, and there's nothing this man can't do. He'll be one of the main, if not probably the favourite for me for this year's Tour de France, which he goes back to try and defend the yellow jersey this season. I believe he's planning to ride La Vuelta as well, maybe going for his first Vuelta a España. He'll start his season at the UAE Tour. I expect him to win that race for the home team, of course. He wasn't able to do that in 2020, but Tadej Pogacar, what a talent. So I think it would be sensible now to move on to a man perhaps who had a contrasting 2020 season. And that man, for me, is Fernando Gaviria, who joined UAE in 2019 after just 2 unbelievable, or a few, unbelievable seasons at Quick Step, where he was winning Grand Tour stages, winning at the Tour de France, winning at the Giro. He came to UAE. He was impressive in 2019. I think he's probably had a difficult season, maybe his most difficult season as a World Tour professional in his career. He had the coronavirus, I think, on 2 separate occasions, forcing him out of the Giro, forcing him out of earlier races as well. I don't think he won a World Tour race. He was second a few times at Tirreno, and was just so disappointing at the Giro d'Italia, not able to compete at all with Peter Sagan, Arnaud Démare, and I think he'll definitely be looking to bounce back to his best in 2021. He'll start at the UAE Tour. Hopefully he can win a flat stage there, because there's quite a few of them. He'll have a few opportunities at the team's home race, and I think he needs to improve, honestly, because this team have lost Jasper Philipsen, who for me is one of the best up and coming sprinters in the world, in the entire peloton. So Gaviria, I think, needs to step it up in 2021.
He certainly does. Now, you've mentioned him having a very tough 2020, and I mean, that was not necessarily his fault. I think the departure of Jasper Philipsen really allows him to claim the top sprinter role of the team. But there are some riders up and coming in that team, mainly his teammate and national teammate as well, Juan Sebastian Molano, who I think did the Giro last year in a supporting role of Gaviria, but then had to DNS or DNF, I can't remember. But it's interesting to see what he's going to do. He's going once again back to the Giro d'Italia. I think the Tour de France might be a bit too hard for him if he wants to go for a points jersey, especially if the likes of Van der Poel and Wout van Aert and Peter Sagan compete for it. I think they are in a different conversation and a different zone to Gaviria. But yeah, 2020 was tough for him. I will give him the benefit of the doubt due to the many, the 2 cases of COVID he's had. But hopefully 2021 can be a bit more easy for the Colombian, and we can start to see the legs he's had with Quickstep.
Do you think he can win a stage at the UAE Tour? I know Caleb Ewan's going there. I think a fair few sprinters will be going there as well. Matteo Moschetti, Nizzolo, Jasper Philipsen for Alpecin Phoenix as well. Do you think he can bounce back straight away alongside Pascal Ackermann, seemingly already on the start list provisionally for the UAE Tour?
I think he can beat a Moschetti and Philipsen. I think on his day he most likely can beat an Ackermann, but on purely flat sprints, I don't think anyone right now can really defeat someone like Caleb Ewan. It'll go down to the train. I think UAE has a better train than the one of Lotto. So yes, I do think he can, and if he has the legs he's had with Quickstep, I think he's a very, very capable sprinter. So I'm gonna go and say that Gaviria will win 2 stages on the UAE Tour, especially it's the national tour of the team. You have to perform well, especially after a very bad season in 2020. You want to appeal to your sponsor, and winning on your national tour would be the best way to do it.
You mentioned the strong train in this team, and on paper, the train is unbelievable. I mean, you have the likes of Max Richese, Juan Sebastian Molano, who can lead you out as well. But you now have Matteo Trentin and Alex Kristoff. I know Kristoff has done some leading out for Gaviria before. We could see the same for Trentin. With those 2 guys, in addition to Richese, known probably as one of the best, the most experienced lead-out men currently in the peloton, Molano too. This team have just plenty of options in the lead-out. So moving on to Matteo Trentin, who for me is one of the most underrated signings for the 2021 season. He's still 31 years old, and he's won plenty of stages at Grand Tours, the Vuelta, the Tour de France. I don't think he's a rapid sprinter, perhaps not as quick as he used to be, but he's a very, very strong rider. He's gone solo to win Grand Tour stages. I remember him doing it at the Vuelta in 2019. He was top 5 Omloop as well in 2020, a race which was very selective. Matteo Trentin, what do you think he can do this season for UAE? I know he's going to ride Paris-Roubaix, and I think he'll be going to La Vuelta as well. I'm not sure if he'll be going to any of the earlier Grand Tours in the season, but this is a genuine contender for some classics, I think, for UAE.
It's quite funny because I do see Trentin as a second Alexander Kristoff. They are both very rapid. Kristoff maybe more rapid than Trentin. They're both very decent when there's cobbles, and they can both go over the hills. Maybe Trentin a bit better than Kristoff. So each has their advantage over the other. He's had a very good campaign of classics last year. I think he podiumed Grand Game behind someone like Mats Pedersen. He did somewhat well in Bruges de Pan. He's had a stinker on the Ronde van Vlaanderen, but it happens. And I think he early on in the season did well at the Omloop before the season got cancelled, just behind someone like Jasper Stuyven and Yves Lampard. So he definitely knows how to go over classics. He's shown it last year. He's a very capable winner, winning 4 stages on 1 Vuelta, I think, and winning a couple of times on the Tour de France. He's the runner-up of the 2019 World Championships, and I mean, we all remember how terrible the conditions were that day, so he can perform no matter the weather, which is somewhat important. So I'm very, very curious to see what Matteo Trentin will do in a team where Alexander Kristoff has been established for the last 3 seasons now, the former Milano-San Remo and Ronde van Vlaanderen winner, who maybe had his years of glory in the Katusha era, but last year won on the Tour de France, won the opening stage actually of the Tour de France in Nice, again in treacherous conditions, maybe a similar point with Matteo Trentin. So if you have a rainy Paris-Roubaix, you know that you can watch out for the UAE kids.
I think that's a great point actually by yourself, saying I didn't really think of it that way, to be honest, with Matteo Trentin and Kristoff, because they are very similar. They're both good on cobbles. They're 2 riders who can sprint. They're not the quickest sprinters. Perhaps I'd put Kristoff above Trentin as well. But they're guys who can win one-day races. They're more than pure sprinters, and they're very similar. Trentin's a few years younger, and I wonder if they might get in each other's way a bit. I mean, could they work together? Yes, but I mean, is Kristoff going to work for Trentin at Paris-Roubaix? Are the races similar? I can't see that happening. So now you mention it, it's going to be very interesting to see how Kristoff and Trentin work together in the one-day races, and how happy they are to lead out for the likes of Gaviria as well, rather than sprinting for themselves.
I think the lead-out role won't be too much of an issue for them. I mean, Kristoff did serve as a lead-out man for Gaviria with UAE. I think Trentin also served as a leader man when he was sprinting for Deceuninck or for Quick Step at the time. But my main worry is for the classics. Yeah, I'm very, very curious to see how well they're going to work together. And you've mentioned them getting in each other's way. That is most likely going to happen. And I mean, I'm all for some drama in cycling, but I'm quite curious to see how things are going to go for them, because I think on a purely like classic level, I'd say they're very, very, very similar. On their day, they can both do very well. I mean, I think Trentin could potentially win a Ronde. I think Trentin could win a Milano-San Remo.
The 2019 World Championships, you mentioned, Trentin was probably odds on to win that race when it came down to Pedersen, Kung. Obviously, we've seen Pedersen's sprinting ability a little more since, but Trentin, I think, was the favourite in that sprint for sure. He would have been gutted to miss out on rainbows that year. If we take a look 2 seasons prior to that, who was it who just missed out on the rainbow bands to Peter Sagan that year? It was Kristoff on home soil in Norway. 2 riders who have come so close to rainbows 2 years apart at similar ages, and they didn't quite get it. I mean, they're so similar. They have so many striking similarities in their career as well. Just intriguing to see how they're going to work together if they do that.
I think they're both experienced riders, so they're most likely not going to take any rash decisions that you could see when you have an experienced and a younger leader both fighting for the number 1 position. So that's the good thing that goes for them. But yeah, they both have a decent ego. I mean, they're professional cyclists, and they've both won their fair share of wins. So it'll be interesting to see maybe a race where you have Kristoff and Trentin, and one of them doesn't feel as good as he would have hoped. Will he tell his teammate, will he tell his team that he doesn't feel great? I don't know. Another
fairly big signing who went under the radar, in my opinion, for UAE this off-season is Rafal Majka, coming over from a few years at Bora Hansgrohe. He's won the KOM jersey twice at the Tour de France. He hasn't quite achieved his own GC ambitions at Bora Hansgrohe, I would say. He was disappointing at the Giro. I think he was ill for the final weeks or final days, of that race. But I think he would have likely been disappointed with his 2020 Giro d'Italia and some of his other GC ambitions as well throughout his time at Bora Hansgrohe. Now into his 30s, he is going to be a superb domestique for Tadej Pogacar at the Tour de France. I think he's already said he is happy to ride as a domestique for Pogacar at this year's upcoming Tour de France. And someone else who may be riding in a similar role is Davide Formolo. And we've mentioned the similarities between Kristoff and Trentin. Formolo for me is a strong puncher, and he's a rider who has some similarities to Marc Hirschi as well. I don't think he's quite as explosive as Marc Hirschi, but he's good on the short hills. He came second at Strada, which was his standout result of 2020. I think a few years ago, people expected Davide Formolo to really develop into a GC contender. He hasn't really been able to do that. He was top 10 at the Vuelta back in 2016 when he was, I think, 24 years old. So he hasn't quite kicked on from there. He's become more of a one-day racer, in my opinion. Obviously, second as well at Liège-Bastogne-Liège to Jakob Fuglsang in 2019. But if these guys, Formolo and Majka, aren't able to add a great amount of wins to the team themselves, I think they can certainly provide some fantastic support to Pogacar in France this season.
100%. I think they are by far the most qualified riders in the team that can support that would not necessarily come from wins. There's also the likes of Rui Costa, the former world champion in the team, or Diego Ulissi that could fit that role. But I'll first touch upon Rafal Majka. He has an incredible experience when it comes to Grand Tours. He is the rider with the most KOM points on the Tour de France since the 2010s started, I think, or even the 2000s, but I think the 2010s. Now, Rafal Majka is a very capable rider. He is the record man of points on the Tour de France when it comes to the KOM since the start of the 2010. He's also a podium finisher on the Vuelta a España. I think he's shown some promises when he first moved from Tinkoff to Bora as well, having a strong 2019 year with 2 top 6 on Giro and La Vuelta. Now, if he moves to UAE to help Pogacar, I think he can once again act as a teammate that could sometimes maybe go for a stage win on a stage where Formolo feels good to protect Tadej. But I'm expecting to see some decent things from Majka. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a leadership position at one time on the Grand Tour. Maybe not this year because he's going to have the exact same calendar as Tadej Pogacar. But you never know. If one rider progresses a bit more this season, a rider that we will touch upon later, Majka could have his chance on the Giro again. And I'll be very, very curious to see how the Polish rider will fare. And that also applies to Davide Formolo. You've mentioned him being more of a classic rider recently, and I tend to agree. I think his GC days are now past. His 9th place at the Vuelta most likely was the only things we would see from him on the Grand Tour. But he is a runner-up of Liège. He's a runner-up of the Strade Bianche. He hasn't had that maiden win yet on the main classics, but I feel like with the help of someone Marc Hirschi, if Marc Hirschi doesn't feel good, he could always potentially go and help Davide Formolo towards a very, very impressive classic wins.
Going back to Majka then, you mentioned his Grand Tour performances in 2019. Perhaps I was a little harsh on him looking back, but we mentioned on the Jumbo-Visma podcast how they can use Steven Kruijswijk, how they can use Sepp Kuss, maybe as dual leaders alongside Roglic, something Ineos have done as well. Do you think that's something potentially that Rafal Majka can try and do for UAE, or should they just try and use him as a super domestique? Because I don't think he can win the Tour de France. I think he should be a teammate there. But looking at the Vuelta, maybe if he goes there as a dual leader with Pogacar and forces other teams to follow attacks by either of those guys, I think Majka, thinking about it, could play that role quite nicely. I don't think he's going to win a Grand Tour in his career, but I don't know. Do you think that's too ambitious to say that's a role Rafal Majka can fill for UAE?
Could they act as a double leader? Yes, but I think in that case the leader has to be Pogacar, because you've mentioned Jumbo and Ineos. When Jumbo does it, it's Roglic, Krojek or Roglic Kos. When Ineos does it, it's Bernal, Thomas, Carapaz, Yates, Chris Froome, everyone. I don't think Majka is on the level of any of the riders I've mentioned. Maybe Chris Froome today, but we'll glance over that. I think the ceiling for Majka is a top 5 on the Grand Tour with a very decent competition. If he's in the shape of his career, a podium. Can he win a Grand Tour? I sadly don't think so. But if he was to act in a double leadership role, I think he would be the one attacking and forcing the other riders to follow. Because if Tadej was to have an attack and everyone would follow, I just think the only one that couldn't follow would be Rafal Majka.
In which case, if his ceiling is top 5, a podium, when you've got the Tour de France winner at 22 years old sat on your team, I think you just use him as a teammate. Surely, I mean, it's not a realistic goal for him to go for the Tour, and why send him up the roads when you've got Pogacar sat in the peloton? I guess. I guess it's an interesting one from a strategic point of view, how UAE are going to play it with those two guys.
Moving on from this focus on a few riders, we are now going to, once again, focus on 2 riders that we think will perform well and have a very good season, and we will be watching them particularly, comparing to some other riders in the lineup. And the rider to watch, according to me, myself, and I, is none other than 22-year-old Brandon McNulty. We've talked about 22-year-old being a great age for UAE, having Hirschi and Tadej Pogacar. You can add a third one, as Brandon McNulty, the former winner of the Giro di Sicilia and runner-up of a stage on the Giro. Love Brandon McNulty. I've been watching him ever since his rally days, when he was performing on the Tour of California. And I think his move to UAE was a very decent one. It started off well with a decent San Juan last year. I think he did well as well in Andalusia. After the restart, he struggled a bit more until the Giro. A Giro he finished in 15th position, not having the greatest of Giros, but he did get a second place in Tortoretto, just behind Pete Sagan actually, and ahead of someone like Joao Almeida. And I think he did well as well on the time trial in Valdobbiadene. So he's a very capable climber, he's a very capable time trialist, he is 22, and he may have the freedom on the Giro that he was hoping for last year, but didn't really have the legs on the Giro. So yeah, Brandon McNulty is my rider to watch, born out of Phoenix.
McNulty is super impressive to me. I mean, I think he was really the leader for UAE at the Giro. I know he dropped a massive amount of time on the Stelvio stage, where we saw Joao Almeida finally lose the Maglia Rosa. But he has shown to be an exceptional time trialist, especially for a Grand Tour contender. Like you said, really strong at the Giro in the time trials, and that is a massive advantage, of course, for any Grand Tour rider in this current day and age. And I think we could well see him definitely move into the top 10. I think he's going to ride the Giro this season. And I think a top 10 could be on the cards, despite a very strong start list at the Giro this season. I wouldn't at all be surprised to see Brandon McNulty. Now he has a 3-week race under his belt, and he's learnt from the Giro of 2020. I can definitely see him achieving a top 10 this time around. So my rider to watch for 2021 for UAE Team Emirates is going to be Alessandro Covi, 22 years old. The Italian has shown an array of abilities already in his young career, and that really showed towards the end of 2020 with a top 10 at Brabantse Pijl. I think that was won by Alaphilippe, if I'm not mistaken. The likes of Cosnefroy, Matthew van der Poel as well at that race, and he's strong on the hills, which he's shown there, and the short cobble climbs. If we go back to 2019, he was top 5 at the Baby Giro. obviously he's got over some pretty sizable mountains there to achieve that result. I don't think he's a pure climber because he can sprint as well. Looking at some of his other results in Italy this season, I think he's just got an array of abilities on the short cobbled climbs, hills. He can sprint as well, and he can get over reasonable mountains. And at 22 years old, I think we could well see a breakout year by Alessandro Covi for UAE Team Emirates.
22 just is a great year for UAE, isn't it? But it's an interesting rider. He did what I've said on the Flèche Brabançonne or the Brabantse Pijl. I wouldn't be able right now to tell you where he particularly excels, because he's had some decent results on different type of terrains. But I want to see more from him. And I mean, UAE is a great team to develop as a young rider by the looks of it. So 2021 could be his season.
I'm not sure when this pod will be going out, but I think he is set to ride the Grand Prix Marseillaise at the end of January, and I think that's parcours that suits Alessandro Covi. So maybe the race has happened, maybe it's about to happen, I'm not sure. I'm expecting a top 10 from Alessandro Covi in Marseillaise.
It'll be interesting. The competition will be hard, and Matteo Trentin is going here with Juan Sebastian Molano, so we'll see how that goes. But it definitely would be a very decent test, an early season test for Alessandro Covi.
So I think that will round out our preview for UAE Team Emirates ahead of 2021. As always, really hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe, follow button wherever you're watching, and definitely let us know what you thought and what you think of the UAE team going into 2021 in the comments. Guillaume, do you have any final words?
Brandon McNulty will be the white jersey of the Giro ahead of Remco Evenepoel.
And on that note, thanks for listening.
See ya.